Hello and welcome to Storytime 14, which is chapter 10 of The Blood King. Apologies that we're a bit late. If you have not listened to the first 9 chapters in the prologue, I would recommend that you head back to episode 4 of Storytime and start from there. But apart from that, let's get going. Chapter 10. So let me get this straight. You invited history buffs that spend their free time coming up with fantastical stories for Blue Valley into our house, asked Dimitri, which, may I remind you, is full of evidence that they could connect to their not-so-untrue theories. Yes, replied Kelsey with an uncaring shrug. I figured it would be fun. Oh yeah, said Dimitri as he began to act out the scenario. Oh, and over here we have the blood fridge, which coincidentally is filled with blood for my 2 older brothers who happen to be 400-year-old vampires. And let's not forget that because I'm a witch, I keep a herbal room right next door to keep all the ingredients I need for potions nice and ready for use, despite the fact that I suck at potion making. Oh, stop whining. You don't even have to be here, insisted Kelsey. And besides, I'm not so stupid as to show them the cellar. She didn't bother denying that she sucked at making potions, though. That required finesse and strong elemental powers, which Kelsey didn't possess. He's not saying that you are, he's just highlighting the fact that bringing ignorant humans in here who have a fixation with the supernatural isn't the best idea, stated Lawrence, who had kept largely quiet through the whole argument. Dimitri argued better than he did, or at least made it seem that way. Lawrence, I wouldn't have said yes if I thought it would present a danger to us, said Kelsey. You know that. The only one who could possibly pose a threat is Janice, who isn't even aware of her Covenant lineage. So, I doubt that'll be much of a problem. You invited an unawakened witch into our home, asked Dimitri, completely and utterly astounded by the thought. Kelsey, you know that's reckless. Who knows what she might come across in this house that could awaken anything dormant within her, Lawrence scolded. That's the thing, she's not dormant, just never been trained, Kelsey said. If she's been in this town for a while and Capricorn hasn't approached her, it stands to reason that she's either of no interest to them or she's unaware of the power she holds. Lawrence looked at Kelsey and then Dimitri before he sighed in defeat. Don't say I didn't warn you. Ashley is coming too, said Kelsey. Dimitri frowned. And why should that concern us? Kelsey gave him a small smile. Us? She chuckled at her brother's use of words. I'm an empathic witch, Dimitri, and with this, I don't even need to look at you to know what you're feeling. Are you implying that I'm attracted to her? Asked Dimitri, with a raised eyebrow. Lawrence turned to his sister, amusement crossing his features. Is she blonde and dressed like a badass? A girly badass, Kelsey confirmed. Lawrence turned back to Dimitri. I don't even need to know her to know you're attracted to her. Are you saying I have a fetish for blondes? Asked Dimitri with slight disbelief. Should we make a list of all the women you've been involved with over the past 4 centuries? As far as I know, you've only been involved with 3 that weren't blonde, said Lawrence. That is so not true, Dimitri snapped defensively. Kelsey? Asked Lawrence, turning back to his sister, who was counting them off on her fingers. Kelsey began listing female names. Let's see, there was Alexandria, Isabella, Topaz, Eleanor, Camilla, Penelope, Isabel, Prudence. I don't like Ashley, Dimitri insisted with a frown. I didn't say you liked her, just that you were attracted, smiled Kelsey as she took up her backpack and headed for the front door. Kelsey hated to admit it, but Dimitri was right. Inviting them over to the house was a risk. But if she refused to invite them, they'd want to know why. Humans were like that, nosy. Besides, she couldn't risk them coming over uninvited anyway. Carpathy was their sanctuary. They could be who they liked there without fear of discovery. Stopping before her small car, Kelsey felt a wave of familiar energy pass over her, and she turned to look down at her feet. A black cat sat there, a powerful aura surrounding it. Kelsey smiled. It's been a while, Lenara. The cat stood and jumped up onto the hood of the car, its body seeming to shift between solid and transparent as the lighting around it changed. It solidified again quickly, as if it had been a trick of the light. "I got bored." Kelsey rolled her eyes. "When are you not?" "You tend to be quite entertaining," Lunara defended. "No, I make an effort to not catch your attention and I fail miserably," Kelsey corrected. Lunara surveyed Kelsey before he stood once more and jumped from the car, his body shifting in and out of focus as he headed for the front door. "Have fun at school then. I'll be making myself comfortable." "You're not staying, are you?" asked Kelsey in annoyance. "For as long as I please," replied Lunara as he walked inside. Dimitri walking out at the same time without glancing at the cat. Kelsey sighed. "Glad to see you too," scoffed Dimitri, appraising Kelsey with annoyance. It was times like these where Kelsey wished that Lunara would show himself to her brothers. According to Covenant legend, Kelsey wasn't supposed to have a familiar, but Lunara had formed an attachment with Kelsey nonetheless. The thing about Covenant legend was that it was almost always written by elemental witches who knew little to nothing about empathic witches. The two were fundamentally different despite their ability to conduct the same spells and brew the same potions. But Kelsey, like all others before her, didn't see a need to make the extent to which they were different common knowledge. Lunara had come and gone many times over Kelsey's life, another thing that elementals would have a hard time believing. An elemental familiar was bound to a witch's side for as long as they lived. Lunara, however, often spent months if not years doing his own thing. He was temperamental, and because of this chose to appear as a cat. Black because he liked to scare the superstitious for entertainment every now and then. Regardless, Lunara kept to himself most of the time, only showing up when it suited him. Kelsey's brothers didn't know she had a familiar, and Lunara seemed to want to keep it that way for his own entertainment. Kelsey humoured him for the time being, mostly because she didn't trust Dimitri to keep his mouth shut. A familiar was an important thing for a witch. They provided a heightened spiritual connection, and therefore a boost in one's power. Climbing into the car, Kelsey resolved that it was a good thing Lunara was here. It wouldn't hurt to have an advantage over Capricorn that they weren't aware of. Lawrence was surprised to be graced by Vincent e Lorenzo's presence for the second time in a week. Usually Vincent had his own agenda, but Lawrence didn't perceive why it had anything to do with him. Dimitri possibly, but not Lawrence. Vincent had deemed Lawrence far harder to influence some time ago. "What do you want?" asked Lawrence as he wiped the grease from his hands. "I've come to grace you with my presence this once and warn you of the huntress who is stalking the town with a scent for you and your brother," stated Vincent. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "And why on earth would you warn me of that? Aren't you working with Capricorn?" "Working with implies friendship. I assure you the alliance we have is simply mutually beneficial," stated Vincent. "What did they promise you?" asked Lawrence. "That is not your concern," stated Vincent. "I was also wondering where I might find your lovely sister." Lawrence frowned at this. "She's not here to entertain you, Vincent, so I suggest you wipe that smug smile from your face." "Believe me, my smug smile is far more appealing than the alternative," said Vincent. "Now, considering I gave you the information regarding the huntress, I suggest you give me the information regarding your sister, unless you want to be indebted to me once more." Lawrence sighed. Always a personal agenda. Lawrence had no intention of being indebted to Vincent ever again, and he knew Kelsey wouldn't like it either. "She's at school at the moment, though she mentioned she would be out with friends tomorrow evening," stated Lawrence. "I'm sure you'll find her then." "Much obliged, young one," stated Vincent. "Careful of the huntress." Lawrence sighed as he watched Vincent stroll from the garage with an unrivalled arrogance in his step. Lawrence had always been cautious of Vincent, but he thought it best if Calcinia didn't know of Vincent's interest in her. She may have been protecting her brothers, but even she did stupid things sometimes. Janice was a historical nerd when it came to Blue Valley, but her speechless expression upon entering Carpothy House was enough for Kelsey to realise that what she was seeing was much more than she ever expected. "Are those the original arches?" asked Janice as she pointed to the wooden door frames that were intricately carved with generations of names from the Frey family dating back to ancient times. Juliana had always taught her children the importance of ancestors in a witch coven. The more ancestors, the more power one could draw from the elements. Empathic witches were, of course, the exception, but Juliana had made them learn regardless. "I assume so," replied Kelsey. "If you have questions on the architecture of the house, you should really be asking Lawrence. He knows all that stuff." "What are those carvings?" asked Ridley as she pointed to the arches. "They look so ancient." "I honestly don't know," replied Kelsey unhelpfully. "They were there when the previous owner had the house, and they didn't know either." "Doesn't that make you curious?" asked Ashley. "Even just a bit." Kelsey shrugged. "A little, but I've never found anything like it in my own research. Whatever it is, it's old." Janice stepped forward and ran her fingertips over the writing. She gasped and drew her hand back suddenly as if she'd burned her hand. "Janice?" asked Ridley. "I'm fine. Just a bit of static," said Janice. Kelsey watched Janice cautiously. She knew it wasn't static. Janice could feel the power within the words, and she could sense their strength. Whether or not Janice could work out what it was that she was feeling was another story altogether, one Kelsey would rather not address. She had enough on her plate right now. Still, it made Kelsey curious. She'd known Janice's ancestors somehow, but she couldn't remember exactly who or when. What had been her last name again? Covenant families usually kept their names as a reflection of their bloodlines. "Kels?" asked Ashley. "You okay?" Kelsey shook herself out of her thoughts and smiled at Ashley. "Yeah, fine. You want to see the library?" "You have a library in here?" asked Peter, surprise lighting up his face. "A small one," replied Kelsey, and she led the group through the arch and into the formal lounge. The lounge itself was split into 2 levels. The ground level, which they walked in on, was where the many bookshelves were situated, as well as the small study table and a large window seat filled with cushions. A railing with a small staircase either side led them down to the small sunken lounge with studded leather couches that faced an open fireplace. The liquor cabinet stood to the side, though it was mostly empty at this stage because Dimitri was in a paranoid mood. "It's gorgeous," said Ridley as she looked around. "It looks so rustic." Kelsey smiled. "Thought about putting a TV in here, but I resolved that it would ruin the look." "Yeah," agreed Ashley, "it would." "Are these spell books?" asked Janice from the bookshelves. Kelsey looked over. Janice had seen through her glamour with ease. She was certainly from a strong bloodline, that was for sure. Kelsey glimpsed Lunara upon the window seat looking at her with an amused expression, attempting not to glare at the fact that Kat was gaining entertainment out of this situation. Kelsey smiled at Janice. "My mum had a weird obsession," Kelsey laughed. "When she died, we couldn't bring ourselves to get rid of them." "Oh," said Janice, as she placed the book back. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up any old memories." "It's okay," Kelsey said. "It was a long time ago." The room fell into an awkward silence before Lawrence walked in. "Hey, Kels, Lawrence stopped as he noticed she had company. "Sorry, I forgot we had guests," Lawrence said. "It's fine, what were you after?" asked Kelsey. "Was just wondering if you wanted pizza or Chinese for dinner," said Lawrence, "and if your friends are staying, of course." Kelsey turned to them. "Are we welcome to?" asked Ridley. "Of course," said Kelsey. "My vote is for pizza," said Peter. Kelsey turned back to Lawrence. "Pizza it is." He nodded and turned back to the kitchen. "Jesus, what a gene pool," said Janice. "What?" asked Kelsey with a frown. "You're all so attractive," explained Ashley. "Could boil a room." Kelsey couldn't help it. She burst into a fit of giggles. "Boil a room?" The others started laughing as well, and Ashley rolled her eyes. First thing that came to mind, guys. Kelsey glimpsed the doorway as the others continued to laugh, noticing Dimitri. She frowned at him, and he stared a minute longer at the group before turning back into the hall. It was clear her brothers were unimpressed with the gathering mortals. She supposed inviting sheep into a wolf den wasn't the wisest decision on her part. Ashley stood on Kelsey's side as the others proceeded to look at the artwork on display around the mantelpiece, indicating to where Dimitri had stood as she spoke. "Is he always so brooding?" Kelsey smiled. "My mother once told him not to wear the weight of the world on his shoulders, to live life rather than to be so suspicious of everything." "She sounds like a wise woman," stated Ashley. Kelsey turned back to the others. "You have no idea." "Oh," said Janice in surprise. "You didn't say you had a cat, Kelsey." Kelsey frowned, feigning ignorance. "I don't." Kelsey cursed Lunara to high heaven as she watched the cat sit pridefully watching the events unfold. Why, of all times, did he have to reveal himself now? Janice turned towards Kelsey and the others from her spot by the window seat. "What cat?" asked Ridley. Looking at the confused faces of those around her, Janice frowned, then proceeded to lie as smoothly as possible. "It was just running past outside. I just assumed—" "Oh, well, no, I don't have a cat," said Kelsey. Lunara was sitting on the windowsill, right where Janice had been looking, so outside wasn't too much of a stretch. "It's probably a neighbour's cat." "Probably," replied Janice as she looked to the window. Lunara looked back at her, eyes amused. "Well, would you look at that, Kelsinia?" asked Lunara. "She thinks she's insane." Kelsey ignored the cat, watching Janice as her eyes widened, horrified at the prospect of a talking cat. "Hey," called Lawrence from the kitchen. "What pizzas do you guys want?" The group left to answer Lawrence, as Kelsey stayed behind to watch Janice cautiously. Janice was still staring down at Lunara in absolute shock. Kelsey was thankful that the others hadn't noticed. Turning her gaze upon Lunara, the cat flicked at his tail as he turned to look at Kelsey. "You know why I did it. You were going to do it eventually anyway. I just saved you a lengthy mental dilemma," Lunara stated. "It talked," said Janice. Kelsey sighed in defeat. Her familiar was right. One way or another, Janice would have gotten involved. Magical blood is not something that can be denied forever. It would have manifested in some form or another, and it would be better if it happened in a controlled environment rather than whatever Capricorn could cook up. "You're not insane," reassured Kelsey. "Lunara is quite special. He can only be seen by those connected to their ancestral power. Others can see him too when he wants them to." "I'm bored," said Lunara as he stood and stretched his feline form. "I'll be on the duvet." Kelsey sighed. She hated it when she had to sleep with a bed full of cat fur. Janice watched the cat leave with her eyes turned to Kelsey. What is going on?" Janice stuttered. "I'll be quite happy to explain at a later time. Right now, please refrain from freaking out," said Kelsey. "Just act as if it didn't happen." "It's a talking cat," hissed Janice. "It was talking to you." Kelsey sighed. "Just don't bring everyone else into this. I've got enough people to protect already." Then Kelsey turned and headed for the kitchen. She cursed her familiar for the millionth time. Lunara and his bloody beard find entertainment. Well, that was Storytime episode 14 and chapter 10 of The Blood King. What do you guys think of Lunara? I think I very much enjoyed writing about Lunara and having him as a character. What about you guys? What other trouble do you think he might get into? Well, that's it for today, and I shall see you next time. Bye.